Hey guys, quick disclaimer before we start the video. With Kara Expo right around the corner, I don't have the time to get out a proper Pop Party deck profile, especially considering the sheer number of options that Poppypaw has, and I also don't even actually have the cards to make a Poppypaw deck profile, so I'll probably wait until Bang Dream Anime Volume 2 comes out, and then do a proper Pop Party deck profile using the new cards, so please look out for that. With that out of the way, how's it going, guys? Shizukats here, and welcome to my Afterglow deck profile. So I've had a love-hate relationship with Afterglow as a Weiss deck ever since its release at the end of 2017 in Girls Band Party 1. Afterglow was marketed as an alarm deck, which made me pretty excited at first, seeing as there hadn't been a deck that had been designed around alarm before. However, it quickly became clear to me that having a deck based around alarms came with a lot of issues. Despite Afterglow cards being featured as key pieces in some meta decks, such as 3-2 Mocha, 3-2 Run Early Play, 2-1 Himari Suicider, and 0-0 Kimahri Runner, pure Afterglow runs into some distinct problems that you don't see when you're using Afterglow as a splash. The first big problem comes from the alarm mechanic effectively taking up an ability slot on cards. Most of the best utility cards in Weiss right now are ones that have multiple utility abilities on the same card. Some cards that come to mind include the Kasumi Drop Searcher, which also has Top Check 2 and Rearrange on play, or the recently released 0-0 Rimuru from the Slime TD, which has on-play Top Check Filter as well as on-play Ditch Climax Salvage. However, Afterglow cards don't have that luxury, with cards such as Mocha Filter or Tsugumi Assist that could have had two abilities on the board, but instead they only have one, with the other ability being taken up by an alarm. Afterglow has a lot more problems beyond just that. During the early game, you'll obviously want to clock high-level cards that aren't playable yet at that stage in the game, such as 3-2 Mochas or Ron Early Plays, but doing so means that you don't get an alarm for that turn, since most of the late-game cards do not have alarms. This also means that you don't get a power boost from Tomboy Brainstorm for that turn either. Other times you'll have multiple alarms that you want to use, but you can't use more than one alarm in a single turn, realistically, because a lot of them have the same activation timing, which is at the start of Climax phase, and you can only ever have one card be on top of your clock at a single time. Also, being at 6 o'clock means that you cannot use an alarm if you clock that turn, since you'll level up and go back to having 0 cards in clock. So the reason that Afterglow is so successful as a splash as opposed to a full deck is because the decks that splash Afterglow don't focus on the alarms in the same way that pure Afterglow does. Like for example, they aren't punished for clocking late game cards in the early game, which is what like pretty much every deck would normally do with their late game cards. As they're basically their only alarm, they run the 2-1 Himari, and it's not conflicting with any other potential alarm effects that they want to use, because they don't run any other ones. They also aren't punished for not having an alarm on top of clock, since they don't use the Tomboy Brainstorm, and instead they use other brainstorms such as Rimi or even Saya from Girls Band Party Set 2, both of which give power no matter what. And a few friends and I were just thinking about how it's really, really sad that Tomboy Brainstorm and Saya Brainstorm are basically the same card, but Saya gives 500 less power in exchange for the power boost being guaranteed. With that being said, the list I'm going to show you guys today wants to replicate that sort of deck building style. I want to limit the number of alarms that I'm going to put into the deck to the really, really good alarm effects, with an overall emphasis on running high quality cards that aren't reliant on the alarm mechanic. Jamming alarms into the deck just for the sake of having alarms is not the goal here. Specifically, what we're going to be sacrificing in order to make this work is a bit of consistency on the Tomboy Brainstorm's 1500 buff due to having less alarms to clock overall. And we're also giving up some consistency on the 3-2 Ron's on-attack burn ability, which we won't be focusing on in this build anyway, since we're primarily going to be going for Mocha's Climax combo at level 3. So here's the list. The ratios are 16, 10, 6, 10, and obviously for the colors, it's 100% green. And for alarms that I run in the deck, I run 15. Also, this deck has a JP exclusive card, which I will note when I get to it, and I'll talk a little bit about replacements when we get to the end of the video. So let's jump right into it. First, we have the Kimahri Runner. This is your ideal turn 1 play every time. Apart from being a free runner, she has an alarm ability that activates at the start of either player's climax phase. You choose one of your characters, and if it reverses the opponent, you can send the top card of your opponent's clock to waiting room, and then send your opponent's reversed character to clock. It's very similar to a clock suicider effect, except you need to reverse their character instead of them reversing yours. This can be extremely useful against cards with on-death abilities, such as Encore. Next up is the Tomboy Brainstorm. She's a Rest 2 Brainstorm, and for each climax hit, you get to search your deck for up to 1 music character. At the start of your climax phase, she can give a 1500 buff to a character if you have an alarm on top of your clock, which is helpful, but I don't want to rely on it too much, especially in the early game, where you're going to want to clock unneeded late game cards. Next, we have 3 Ron Suiciders. On stage, she is a level 0 clock suicider, and she has an alarm ability. At the start of your climax phase, if she's on top of clock, you get to give one of your characters Twin Drive for the turn, which can be helpful to pay out a triggered climax on the fly or try to deal some extra damage by triggering extra soul triggers. This card is pretty important to keep your opponent's early game in check, since the overall power of the level 0s in this deck is quite low. Use this to kill their oversizes and give your Kimahri Runner more room to run. Next is the latest addition to the deck, 3 Ron Drop Searchers. It's just an ordinary 2500 drop search, but it helps the deck's consistency so much, since the deck's only other targeted search are a Brainstorm, which is unreliable, and the 3/2 Ron Alarm. This card is JP exclusive though, and honestly, it hurts the deck quite a bit to play Mono Afterglow without it. Lastly, in the level 0, we have these 2 1-ofs. The first one is the Ron PR. On play, pay 1, ditch 1, top check up to 3, and choose 1 card among them, add it to your hand. Honestly, since adding the drop searchers to the deck, this card's value has gone way down in my opinion, but I still think it's fine to run 1 copy in case you do need it. The Kimahri is a top check filter. It has the same effect on play as the 0/0 Mocha that I mentioned earlier, but it has a different alarm ability. As long as she's on top of clock, if your opponent brainstorms and hits a climax, you get to choose one of their level 0s and it can't stand next turn. This also actually works against the 1/0 Kasumi event, since it is a brainstorm. So if they brainstorm the top 3 cards of their deck and you see a climax, you get to prevent one of their level 0 characters from standing during their next stand phase. So that's the reason why I chose to play this Kimahri over the Mocha, specifically for this banned league list. However, you could honestly play either one. I want to briefly talk about the 3/2 Ron Alarm, since it's a very useful early game ability. So this 3/2 Ron's Alarm is like a Ricky effect. At the start of your main phase, if this Ron is on top of your clock, you can pay 1 and put the top card of your deck on the bottom of your clock, then search your deck for any Afterglow character. This gives the deck some much needed consistency. However, I only run 3, since it's not a playable early game like how the regular Rickies are, and running 4 could cause these to flood my hand. Also, since the cost puts the card on the bottom of your clock, it lets you maintain the Ron on top in order to get a boost off of Tomboy Brainstorm, since you have an alarm on top of your clock. However, this also means that you can't use the cost in order to try to get another alarm off the top of your deck, and try to use 2 alarms in a single turn, because the card you clock is going to go to the bottom of your clock. Moving on to the level 1s, we have the Tsugumi combo. During your turn, she gains 2k as long as your entire field is green, which it will always be because this is Mono Afterglow. And she has a Minami combo on a split 2k1 climax. So with the climax power, this brings her up to 8-5 power, which is really, really high. And the fact that the combo gives an additional 2k power on reverse means that you can beat some really, really high opponents. However, her naturally high base power on offense means that even on the first attack, she'll have a pretty easy time reversing most opponents, even if your opponent hits level 1 first. An exception to this would probably be Pastel Palettes, which has naturally huge cards on the board at level 1. However, if you left a runner on the board from your level 0 game and no other cards, you can deny them reverses with their Maya combo, discouraging them from playing their combo immediately upon hitting level 1. So they might not play the combo and then play other cards instead, which gives you easy reverses. This combo is very important for securing your mid-game pieces, as well as getting through your first deck quickly so you can get into your second deck and move on to playing other cards, such as your Ron early plays. Next, we have the 1/0 Ron combo from the trial deck. She gains 500 per other music character on attack, bringing her up to 6500 with a full board, and has a climax combo with the gold bar, same gold bar as the Mocha 3/2. On attack, she gains an additional 1k power and on reverse blind stock. I only run 2 copies since this is a more of a backup level 1 combo, since I already run the climax anyway for the level 3 Mocha. This is the same thing that Meta Fever Cosme Mocha deck does, where they also just run 1 or 2 copies of the Ron combo. I run 2 of this 1-0 Tsugumi. On play, you can ditch 1 and clock the Kimahri Runner from your waiting room, then grab a music character from your clock, add it to hand, and this gets plus 2k power for the turn. Doing this sets up a Kimahri on top of your clock, ready to use her alarm ability. It also guarantees that you will have the Tomboy Brainstorm buff for that turn. It's worth noting that you cannot use this ability when you already have 6 cards in clock, otherwise you'll level up before you even get to grab anything. Also worth noting, you can use this effect while you have 0 cards in clock, in which case you will clock the runner from your waiting room and then immediately pick it up and add it to hand. It's a useful, costless ditch outlet that also hits for pretty big numbers. The last level 1 I play is this Tomboy Bonder. On play, she can ditch bond to the 3-2 Ron early play, and when you play that Ron to the stage, the Tomboy sends herself to stock and gives Ron 1500 power until the end of the turn. This essentially turns Ron into a pseudo discard 1 heal to stock, because you're going -1 on cards, but your Ron only ends up really costing 1 stock. Apart from double Brainstorm back row, Tomboy is, in my opinion, the best card to use in your back row as your second rest for the Brainstorm cost, at least until you hit level 2. When you do reach level 2, you can play the Ron, send Tomboy to stock, and then that frees up your back row slot in order to play a 2-1 Mocha support. Speaking of the 2-1 Mocha support, that's our next card. She is a level support and additionally becomes a global 500 if you have the early play Ron on stage. She's also a rest to salvage Brainstorm, so having a back row of this Mocha plus the Tomboy Brainstorm gives you the option to use either a salvage Brainstorm or a search Brainstorm, which is really convenient. Next up we have the 2-1 Kimahri that you all know and love. She's an anti-change clock suicider and has an alarm effect that lets you get an extra free stock if you have 4 or more music characters on board. Very solid card. Most of the time we're not going to be putting her on the board at level 2 since we will want to be playing our own early plays, but this means we get to clock her and get that sweet free stock from the alarm. The last level 2 I run in the deck is the rest counter. It's a 2-3 event counter that lets you rest one of your opponent's characters if you have 5 Afterglow on stage. It's pretty important that you secure a Mocha support in your back row in order to get your characters high enough to remain on the board. That way you can actually use your rest counter. Also, if your opponent's board has some pretty high power characters, consider crashing your Ron early play into their high cards and then encore her to keep her on stage so that you can have 5 characters and use the rest counter. Next, let's move on to the level 3s. First, I want to talk about the Ron early play. If you have 2 or less climaxes in your waiting room, she can be played at level 2. On play, if you have 2 or more other music characters, choose any music character from your clock and heal it to memory. Having the ability to choose any card from clock is really nice, since if you have an alarm on top, you can heal the cards underneath it in order to maintain the alarm on top in order to get the boost from the Tomboy Brainstorm and utilize your alarm effect. She also has Encore by discarding an Afterglow character, which in this deck, which is pure Afterglow, basically just makes it a regular character Encore. Next up we have the Mocha level 3 combo, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. At the start of the Encore step of the turn she was placed on stage from hand, you get to heal 1. And her climax combo with the gold bar on attack lets you look at the top 2 cards of your opponent's deck to get rid of any of their climaxes that you see there. And then you get to look at the top 2 cards of your own deck to potentially manipulate triggers or even manipulate climaxes. She has a very powerful combo that can serve as a pseudo burn ability or guarantee lethal hits. Finally, for the last level 3, we come back to the 3-2 Ron. In addition to her earlier mentioned Ricky alarm effect, on attack, you can pay 1 to mill 3 and burn the opponent equal to the number of alarms that you milled. As I mentioned before, we're primarily going for Mochas in this deck, so playing Rons at level 3 isn't our most favorable option, especially since the number of alarms in this deck is relatively low. However, we do want to keep this card as an option for our late game, so when you level up, you're going to want to level up cards that do not have alarm, so that you can keep alarms in your deck in case you need to use this for your end game. Going back now to the drop searchers, which were the JP exclusives. Prior to those being in the deck, I probably would have just played a 4th Ron Suicider and a 2nd copy of each of the Ron PR and the Kimahri/Mocha filter, whichever one you want to play. You could also try running the Swimsuit Kimahri card. That card is decent, although as I mentioned earlier, I would prefer to have a Tomboy bonder in my second back row slot as opposed to putting the Kimahri there. So this concludes my Afterglow deck profile. Hope you guys enjoyed, and of course, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them down in the comments section below. Until next time, this has been Cheesecats. Bye!